Thanks, Maggie. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you all could join us today for this part of our May's Mental Health webinar series. We've been doing this in partnership with Lackawanna County, Scranton Area Community Foundation, and the United Way of Lackawanna and Wayne Counties. We had a webinar last week, and we have two again next week. So I hope you're able to participate in some of the others as well. If you're not able to attend, Scranton Area Foundation will be posting all the webinar recordings to their YouTube channel, and there will also be a link on the Moses Taylor Foundation website for you to access. You all asked such great questions when registering for this webinar, so I'm excited to hear what advice our speaker has to offer. So we're just going to get right to it and not take up any more of your time. Some of you may remember Beth Kanter as our keynote speaker at our open house and healthy workplace event back in September 2017. Beth is an author, a virtual facilitator and trainer, and an internationally recognized thought leader in well-being in the workplace with over 35 years of providing capacity building for nonprofits and foundations. She was named one of the most influential women in technology by Fast Company and one of Business Week's Voices of Innovation. And she's the co-author of the award-winning network nonprofit books and the Happy, Healthy Nonprofit Strategies for Impact Without Burnout. So I'll turn it over to you, Beth. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you, Jeff and Maggie, and thank you so much for hosting this. I'm really honored to be here and to talk with you about this really important topic. This is a webinar number one of a two-part series, and for this webinar, we're going to be focusing on work-life balance. Now, what I'm going to do is turn off my video. If any of you have been using Zoom a lot and you're experiencing Zoom burnout or Zoom exhaustion, part of the reason is that we're not used to presenting and talking while staring in the mirror. So one of the things that I have been doing is turning my video off so it's not as distracting. So on today's webinar is really going to focus on work-life balance and personal resilience and what we can do for ourselves during these really bizarre times. We're going to do a little exercise around COVID healing and reinvention. I'm going to give you a presentation with some tips on work-life balance and how to think about it in the era of social distancing and working from home and in the middle of a global health crisis. And then we'll have lots of time at the end to answer your questions and then a little bit of takeaway. And thank you for those of you who submitted questions in advance. You know, I do have some answers for those, and I've incorporated some of those into my presentation. I want to try to make this participatory, so I want to encourage you to use the chat as much as possible or the Q&A. There's lots of different ways for you to virtually ask questions, and I have a little chat box up, so I'll be answering. And kids, dogs, cats are welcome. These are kind of weird times and new workplace norms, and I'll be talking about that in a little bit on this webinar and a lot on the webinar next week. And my outcomes for success is that you identify some steps to reduce COVID anxiety and to identify a routine for personal resilience and work-life balance. Many times people ask, will the slides be available? What about those resources she mentioned? Well, the good news is that I've put them all on a Google Doc for you, and you can see the URL at the lower in the lower part of the screen, and maybe for some of the follow-up, we will, you'll get that link again. So I want to start off with a quick poll and see how present you are in this meeting. One of the things with Zoom is that we, you know, as opposed to being in a conference room together, we can't see each other really. So it's so really easy to be distracted. So I want to get a sense of how present you are now on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being I have 10 other tabs open, another meeting to hop to, and the dog is barking, and someone just slammed the door in the next room where my kid is, ... That's a 1. And 5 is I'm totally with you. This video chat is like a Zen meditation. So now I'm going to launch the poll, and hopefully it will work. And Maggie, I'm going to rely on you to be my eyes. you can see it?
Yep. Yep.
Great.
You can see it. Thank you.
Good. And now I see people taking it. So let's just give it a moment and see where we are. I'll just give it a few more minutes. It's really interesting to me. I've been asking this question since the pandemic started, when I've been doing trainings and sessions, and the results are changing over time. So just give it here another second or two, and then we'll share the results. Okay, I'm going to click end poll, and hopefully let me click the share results button so everybody can see it. So great. So I see folks that are at the sort of the higher end of focus in the 4s and 5s, a few in that distracted area. Great news, we don't have 1s. I saw a lot of 1s at the beginning of the pandemic, so that's great. People are beginning to learn to minimize distractions while working at home. So I would invite you to think about ways that you are coming into virtual meetings and virtual work where you are minimizing distractions, and kind of think about what you need to up your score during this webinar to be fully present. Great. So one of the things that I have been doing a lot of is starting meetings with a moment of quiet meditation, just a minute. And there's a wonderful app called Insight Timer that will ring the bell. And sometimes when I feel overwhelmed, I just give myself a timeout. And so I'm going to give us all a timeout to become centered and focused. So we'll hear a bell, and it'll be a full minute of quiet meditation. Great. So that was just a moment of quiet meditation. I mean, I'm in California, so I can get away with it. It may not be the right thing for your organization, but I have been, even before the pandemic, with so many meetings that we go to, just to start with a moment to catch our breaths is a nice ritual to add some spaciousness and a feeling of getting focused and connected, and especially in these difficult times. So I'm going to move on to, I want to talk a little bit about your COVID healing response. And we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty in the face of the pandemic. When are we going to go back to work? What will it look like? Are we going to be working in shifts? Are we going to be working at home? Our families, school, just, day-to-day activities. So uncertainty is stressful because we know we can't control everything. So I'm going to do a little exercise now in the chat, and I'm hoping everyone has access to the chat box. And what I'm going to do is give a series of 4 different prompts, and I'm going to share those prompts in the chat, and I'm going to ask you to reflect on the question, to type a response, but don't send it until I give the word. And I know it's a little bit different than you're used to using chat, and if you send it by mistake, it's okay. And this comes from a facilitation process style called Liberating Structures, and the name of the exercise is called Grief Walking, and it's a way to kind of open up and let go. So the first prompt is, the first of 4, if only ... So think about it, type your response in the chat, but try not to send it. So you're reflecting on it, and think about the uncertainty and answer in that way, if only. Okay, you can send it. Hit the send button, and you can send it to panelists or attendees. You know, I see most folks sending it to all panelists. Okay, it's okay to send it. Let's just send it. And the second prompt is, it makes me ... So the second prompt is, it makes me. And you can send it. Okay. Okay. It's good. I'm seeing some responses here. And the third prompt is, I have to ... So think about it, type it in the chat, and then send it. And if you send it, there we go, send it with love. And it is going, some of these are just going to the panelists, so I'm just seeing it, and I'm going to summarize this. This is also something you can do on Zoom if you're using Zoom meeting, and everybody can see how everyone's feeling. See them coming in. And the final prompt is, when all is said and done, whoops, done, ... So when all is said and done, type it into the chat, and now send it. Great, thank you. So I'm seeing here, a lot of people are feeling around the uncertainty. They're feeling tired and anxious, and yearning for family, yearning for a vacation, feeling overwhelmed and frustrated, you know, feeling anxious about getting caught up in work, and tired. So everyone is, you're not alone. So if you're feeling those feelings, you're not alone. Know that, you know, this is part of what's going on. The I have to, people are talking about ways and intentions. I have to take a break. I have to become more healthier. I have to find a way to be more positive, continue to perform, be optimistic, wait for things to change, intentionally disconnect. So, so a lot of sort of coping strategies going on. And when all is said and done, I see a lot of kind of, I see one, and I agree with this one, a beach vacation. I'm longing for that too. But, you know, hoping that a lot of hope and gratitude, and feeling safe again, and feeling fortunate. So this is an exercise called grief walking. You can do it in a chat where everybody is sharing their responses all together, and it gives, you know, people to check in around, you know, around what we're going through, without having to maybe spend your whole meeting talking about this. But it's really important to check in around feelings and people's mental health. The most important thing you can do, I think, as a leader is to continue to check in with your people. One thing I'd like to share with you is this is a framework that is from the Genesis Healing Institute, and it's about healing in around COVID-19. And the pandemic has prompted the largest global work from home and homeschooling experiment due to the need for social distancing. And so many of us in the nonprofit sector, many staff were prevented from working face-to-face together in their physical offices, slowly as we began shelter in place and saw it roll throughout the country. Many nonprofits had to abruptly pivot to virtual work from home, and some were more used to it than others. For others, it was a new experience, and others had to quickly adapt their programs for online, to make it for delivery and supportive programs, whether it was, pivoting to virtual support sessions or online ordering. And within all of this, I think our nonprofit staff well-being and productivity are really taking a hit. And it's not that just because we're working remotely, it's because we're working at home during a global health crisis and an economic crisis. And what's coming is, if it's not already here, is a mental health crisis. And we may know people who have gotten sick, and sadly, maybe those who have passed from the virus. And we're seeing it in our neighborhoods, and we're seeing it in our communities and our clients. And maybe we're seeing it on our Facebook feeds or in the news. And this has been a traumatic collective experience, and we're all hopefully now on the path to some sort of healing and living a more vibrant life in face of uncertainty and whatever this new normal is that will come to us. So while it's natural for us to want to return to some semblance of equilibrium, for comfort, maybe we want to avoid adapting and normalizing what is our current reality. And I want to encourage you to think about the opportunity to evolve ourselves and others. And although seeing suffering is distressing, it also offers a unique chance to activate our empathy and to be better advocates for ourselves, for our families, and for the clients and people that we're serving through our nonprofit organizations. And I like to call this leading with radical empathy. So I would encourage us all to think about transformational healing. And to that end, this is this framework that comes from Genesis. And it's kind of that we're going through different stages in the way we think. Maybe initial shock. I'm unsure of the future. I'm unsure of the health information that's out there. I'm afraid of losing a loved one or my job. So the shock piece. And then maybe we'll move towards adaptation, where we'll ask for support when needed, engage in something meaningful to me and others, or I'm anchoring myself in the present moment. And going from adaptation, we have evolution, and this is maybe you're reviving a personal dream that you gave up on, that you're going to look at your present circumstances with curiosity, and that you're going to have the ability to move on from things that do not serve you, whether that's personally or whether that's organizationally. And then we'll reach liberation, that will live in a world courageously without fear, that will give freely to those that need it, and to anchor yourself and your organization in infinite potential. So I encourage you to really think about for a moment, maybe do some journaling to think about during this very strange time, to take some quiet moments of reflection and to think about, what are you discovering? What are you letting go of? What might you be keeping? What are you creating? And how are you envisioning an optimistic future, not only for yourself personally, but maybe also within your organizations? So I just wanted to start with that framing to give you something that will help us start to let go of some of the feelings of overwhelmed and feelings of exhaustion, which are natural. So I'm going to go through some work-life balance tips, some simple things that you can do for yourself. And really, work-life balance is really one of the being able to disconnect from work at the end of the day. And it's one of the foundations of mental health. And but the problem is that work-life balance has really kind of relies on social interaction, go to the gym, meet up with friends, take a vacation, as some of you mentioned in the chat. But instead, now we need this new way to think about work-life balance, given that we're working from home, or maybe working, being more sheltered in place than normal. So before I give you these tips, I want to think about why it's so difficult to get work-life balance. And part of that reason is that, before the pandemic, it was easy to compartmentalize your work week with things because you had the commute, you had weekend plans, you had Monday morning office banter. But our current situation has made those rituals disappear. So instead, the days blend together. I've heard, what day is this? Is it Thursday? Is it Friday? Is it Sunday? Afternoons turn into nights. Weekends and weekdays become interchangeable and blurry. And our sense of time is totally thrown off, making it easier than ever to work or overwork and to think about work all the time. And all of this can lead to burnout, and it's accelerated by prolonged periods of stress and uncertainty. And while we can't control what's happening in the outside world, we can take control over our days and our own work-life balance. So with that said, here are some tips. So the first thing is to return to the basics. And the Happy Healthy Nonprofit, I talked about the health triad, and that's sleep, nutrition, and exercise. And I know people have been kind of joking around, the COVID-15 gaining weight because we're at home snacking, or that we even can't get healthy food. But just a reminder that, what you put in your body helps with your moods. Getting enough exercise. If you met me before when I came to Scranton, you know that I'm a Fitbit advocate, and I love walks, and was getting 15,000 steps a day, walking that 5 to 7 miles daily. And initially, during the first part of the pandemic, I wasn't walking, and I really started to feel it. And then I realized that, the one blessing in shelter in place was that they still allowed us out to jog or to exercise. So I made a commitment to get out every day and take my walk. I had that replace my commute. And while as much as I want to binge eat all the ice cream in my freezer, I'm also trying to keep healthy food on my plate and for my family. And the other thing that has been impacted, I know it's not just me, I've heard it from a lot of other folks, is that sleep has been disrupted. And that's because we're maybe overstimulated from a lot of screen time, the anxiety around the virus. And I have to admit that I had some plague-induced insomnia. So I started to turn to better, remember my sleep hygiene and not, turn off the screens before sleep, try to have calm bedtime routines. And one of the things that I have found, it's a pro tip, is the Sleep With Me podcast, which helps adults who are suffering from insomnia get a better rest. And then it's nice about it, it's free, low cost. So tip one is to remember the health triad and those basics. The second is to establish rituals to block your workday. Now, if you look at that chart on the left, which comes from Time Rescue from their data, it shows, the first bar there at the top is that, we work at home on average 5.5 hours, and then we're at home, okay? But when we were actually living, going into the office, we have buffer times. We may have a commute time. We may even have, then in-person meetings for part of our day, and then our commute home. But we still be working 5 hours and 30 minutes a day. And that last one shows maybe executives. So if you're an executive director, maybe you had more of your time in meetings in addition to the time that you're working. And so now that, what's happened with COVID-19, that all of our markers, are gone. And and we have no place to go. So, so we've lost kind of those rituals to begin and end our day. So I would encourage you to start some. So mine is every morning I'm going out and I'm walking. And in the last 6 weeks or so, I have been really enjoying all my neighbors' wonderful flowers. There's beautiful roses blooming, and I've been taking pictures of them. And I pretend that I'm on a vacation in a botanical garden in Hawaii. And it's been a beautiful way to just forget about it, turn off work, and reduce stress. I also have an end of the day ritual, And that is, I set an alarm for the end of my workday. And it's my warning bell. And when I get that alarm, it's, I write up my list of to-dos for the next day. I shut down my laptop. I even put it away and out of sight. I turn off all alerts on my phone and I put it in the charging station. And that signals to me that it's, you know, it's non-work time. So, so these are some examples of start and stop rituals. Start rituals being, you know, take a shower and put on clothes, make your coffee, write your to-do list, go for a walk, replace your commute. Have some stop rituals, you know, close down your laptop, set your phone in airplane mode, you know, to use that time to reflect in a journal, or to wrap up your day and plan for the next day. So what are some start or stop rituals that you can do? Why don't we share that in the chat? Think about it. Think about something you can do. And I see some things, great ideas there, about shutting down, start my day with a yoga practice, some great things, great ideas there coming up. So think of that time before starting work as you're commuting down the hall, maybe take your walk, find some sort of ritual to start your day. I love this, go to Dunkin' for iced coffee. So the next thing, is to find a dedicated workspace. And I know some of us aren't set up to have, you know, a home office, and we might have to find some dedicated corner in our house, you know, or apartment. Even if it's just a chair at your kitchen table, it's one of the most important things you can do to protect yourself from burnout, because it's all about setting boundaries. And we talk about setting boundaries with when we're going to work and how much we're going to work, but it's also where you're going to work in your house. So, so you don't need a whole separate office. You don't need a corner office. All you need is a dedicated workspace that lets you walk away at the end of the day. And if it is that ironing board, that lets you shut it up and put it away, put it back in the closet. If you have kids at home, having a dedicated space also helps you create boundaries with them. And you can also set up a system that lets them know when it's okay to visit or when you need time to focus. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment, also juggling kids. So, and you can be creative with your workspace, you know, maybe it's in your bedroom. I wish my workspace looked like that. I saw that on Pinterest. I thought, oh, isn't that lovely? Or maybe you want to spark some joy, put plants on your workspace, set it up so it makes you happy. And maybe this is the time to start hacking a standing desk, because we know that sitting in your seat, especially if you're sitting in a chair that's not comfortable and it's not the right ergonomic setup, it's not good for your back. So maybe you could hack a standing desk like my colleague here with a music stand and a carton. And I've seen all kinds of creative ways to hack a standing desk, you know, on the piano and with toilet paper if you can get it. So think about making yourself a standing desk. The next thing is to practice mental distancing. And we know that the public health advice is to social distance, but also try to mental distance from the news and the discussion about the virus. You can't obsess about every news report or the worst possible outcomes all the time. I found myself doing that, and I had to put myself on a news diet by only consuming 1 hour a day of news, and just to be enough to be informed, to keep myself and my family safe. It's also important to practice information hygiene. So where you're consuming news from, are they trusted scientific sources? So I've also created COVID-free conversation zones. So with family, so where there's places where we're not going to talk about the virus. We're not going to discuss it. We're putting some boundaries around that. It's not that we don't believe it's here, or that we don't care, or that we don't want to be safe, but we really want to protect our well-being by putting some boundaries around it. The next tip is to embrace being authentic. So as the crisis has unfolded, I've had to ask myself every day, what expectation of normal am I giving up? And one of them is that sometimes dogs, pets, partners, kids might crash your Zoom meeting or might be heard on Zoom calls. And I think we need to be gentle with ourselves and especially with our coworkers, if they're juggling homeschooling their kids, or if they have young kids. Of course, if you are in that situation where you have a young child at home, you know, you might need to put yourself on mute and be off camera if that's the case, and it should be okay. So we have to be authentic. The next is having a gratitude practice. We know from research that negative thoughts can increase our anxiety, and being positive and being grateful can improve our well-being. So maybe starting the day with some positive prompts that you might want to journal. What am I grateful for today? How will I get outside today? What is one thing that made me laugh? What beauty am I creating? Or just being grateful for, you know, I'm very grateful to have work. Every morning I say, I give my some quiet gratitude thoughts about that I'm grateful that I can work from home. I'm grateful that I can put food on the table. I'm grateful that we have our health and our family. I'm grateful to go outside. So even little things. I'm grateful for the beautiful weather that's here. I'm grateful that I put up a bird feeder and I can watch birds from my desk. So when you acknowledge being grateful for something, according to the science, that it ups your well-being. So think about how you can be positive and start your day with some gratitude. Incorporate quiet time into your day. One would think that we're all working from home, we would have less work, but I'm hearing more cases of back-to-back Zoom meetings. And, you know, in times of uncertainty, we get overwhelmed and we don't know what to focus on. Our routines have shifted. And so the result is that we're not always accomplishing as much. And this leads to feelings of anxiety and further contributes to our perception of a lack of control. But if you do incorporate quiet time in your schedule where you're just thinking through some stuff, you can even see in this one somebody's personal time. It restores your nervous system. It replenishes your energy and concentration. It facilitates clear thinking and creativity. It quiets negative thoughts and it improves productivity. So think about how you can incorporate some quiet time in your day. And here's a pro tip. I love this quote from Stephen King: write with the door closed, rewrite with the door open. So go offline when you need to focus on your most important work and give your space to do that, so you have the time and energy for other things later on. And think about how you're going to shut the door. And it may be physically, you know, maybe you're going to have a talk with your family and, you know, have certain signs up. I have a sign that says, "Mommy's in a webinar right now, do not enter." When I have to deliver talks like this. And of course, my kids are older, and maybe if you're sharing child caring responsibilities, maybe your partner will entertain the younger kids in a separate area so it doesn't conflict. And the other thing you need to turn off is maybe electronic distractions, you know, your phone alerts, or turn off Slack alerts and notifications. And one little trick that I do when I need that is I put my phone in airplane mode. And I also take advantage of the custom status alerts and things like Slack that say I'm offline writing a report. So people don't think I'm, you know, so they know not to disturb me. Another thing is that makes some of us feel good is to tend and friend. Caring for others or just checking in can help reduce stress. You can do calls with friends. I have found that I'm so zoomed out that I will just get on the phone with family, and I will do it in a separate place from where I work, and that has helped me. I've also started with colleagues, both friends and professional colleagues. We've been sending cards to each other, and that's been, and also people that I'm working with on a team. I have because I've gotten some nice stationery and I got some nice pens, and it's sort of a nice thing to do, to write them a note to let them know that I'm thinking about them and how important they are to me. Or maybe it's helping an elderly neighbor or something. Our family also adopted a senior rescue dog during the pandemic because we thought that would be a help in our community. And also it brought great joy to my kids who've always asked me for a dog. And I said no, but I thought, well, this is the time to do it. So our dog, that's Tigger, and he's been a joy to our family. I'm really glad that we did this because we had the time for it. I guess my final tip is going to be eat a rainbow every day. So, and this comes from a colleague of mine, you may be familiar with him, John Hayden, who was a nonprofit marketing and fundraising expert. And sadly, he passed away shortly before the pandemic started of cancer. And he fought a battle with cancer for almost 2 years. And one of his best tips was that he asked himself every day, what rainbow am I going to eat? And he was talking about eating a rainbow in terms of a rainbow of healthy fruits and vegetables. But I think also the rainbow is a symbol of hope and maybe the optimism that's on the other end of this pandemic. And in our neighborhood, they have been doing this thing called Chalk the Walks. And so the kids have been drawing stuff with colored chalk on the walks, including rainbows. And then other families, when they're out on a walk, social distancing, they count the rainbows. So I think this reminds us that there are rainbows that we can start to imagine that are yet to come as we think about the other end of this pandemic. So those are some tips. I want to talk a little bit briefly about self-care. And just maybe as a reminder, I don't know if any of you were at my workshops, when I did come to Scranton or have read the book, but I do talk about the importance of building a self-care plan and to think about the things that you can do for yourself, to take care of yourself, about your relationships with other people, about your physical environment, your relationship to work, and then also relationship with technology. And it helps to actually just write it down and approach it with intention. And in the materials, I have a self-care plan template that you can use to write your plan. But the most important thing is to begin those habits. And I think that the secret to creating this resilience is creating new habits that stick. And one of my favorite habit experts is BJ Fogg. He's just recently published a book called Tiny Habits. And the theory goes that you anchor this new habit that you want to start around an existing behavior. You identify the new habit and you make it small. And when you do it, you celebrate. And so if you go to the site, they've also been offering a lot of free webinars and classes on tiny habits and well-being, especially around the pandemic. And I went to one that was about starting a kind of mini meditation habit. And it was kind of the first thing is to anchor yourself. Let's say you want to start some deep breathing. So what is the cue? Like, is it, after I make my bed in the morning, after I pour my first cup of coffee? What's that tiny behavior? I'm just going to take 3 breaths. I'm going to put my device on silent. I'm going to think some thoughts about gratitude. What is that tiny behavior you're going to do after that cue? And then finally, it's about once you do it, to celebrate. Say, yay, I did it. Or, take a bow. And so these are some ways to sort of incorporate some of your habits. So with that, I'm going to open it up for some Q&A. And what I'm going to do is stop sharing and just take a look and see if there's questions that have come in. I don't know, Maggie, have there been any in the Q&A chat panel?
No, not yet, but people are welcome to also use the Q&A in addition to the chat feature.
So, and I do have some answers for some of the questions that were submitted in the registration. I can also share some of those. Well, let's start. One of them, okay, so one of the questions I got is, how do you end your day or take a lunch when calls are at random times and laptop is always nearby? So, so the first thing I would do is establish your office hours. So when you are, and within your office hours, when you're available for calls, and let people know that. So, so it could be certain days, it could be certain hours. I've noticed a lot more of my colleagues doing that, saying, phone calls at these times. And I know it's difficult if you're dealing with, trying to support clients and who might be in crisis, I mean, that might be a different story. You might need to then create shifts where people can take calls. And one thing I do is to make sure that you put your laptop away or shut it down at least after hours, and make a ritual out of it. Because I found my particular workspace right now, I have my 2 college kids at home taking classes. My husband's at home, and we're in our empty nester home, which is small, and it's not designed to have everybody to have a door to shut. So I'm kind of in the edge of my kitchen / dining room, and sometimes if I leave my laptop out, then it's there on the dinner table while we're having dinner, or or I can see it from the kitchen when I'm trying to make dinner. So I put it away. And I'm done working, and and at first I felt guilty doing that because I felt like because of the crisis, I felt I had to work, I had to serve, but I realized that that's not sustainable, and that I had to make that space. Great. I see a question in the chat. I love the question of what expectation of normal am I giving up? Feels like such an important signal for managers to give their teams. Any recommendations on how to do this practically? One thing I did see that I thought was really amazing. It was on Twitter the other day, and it was actually from the Canadian government, and it came from the Canadian government, and it was new employee staff expectations. It came from the managers, and it was like 6 set of principles. And the first one was like, your well-being and mental health is important. We want you to take care of yourself. If you're please check in if you need support, those sorts of things. And the last one was, please note that your job performance evaluation is changing given crisis, so that we don't have expectations that you're working all the time. Another way to do this would be to use that question as an icebreaker for virtual meetings, and just have each person check around and talk about what are you giving up? The fact that, one thing that's really important to talk about, I think, is that when we shift to virtual, it's really more about getting the deliverables done versus seat time. So maybe the expectation that we're sitting in our seats and that we're, there at beck and call, 24/7, maybe we're just letting that go for a bit. Okay, I'm going back down the chat. I see another question. Many of us feel that knowing what's happening in the community, state, nation is part of our job and is necessary to help the people we serve. We receive multiple newsletters, publications, and watch the news at different times. How do we limit our news exposure but still feel like we're informed about what's happening? I, too, am in the same boat, kind of like that as well. And I have just put limits on it. And I have, instead of doing it all the time as things come into my email or doing it in between meetings, I just have a dedicated amount of time, like once a day, to do that, to like scan the news. And then I've also have set up a place where I can pluck out the information that I'm receiving and have it out of my emails or out of my social media feeds. And maybe I put it in a Google Doc, and I'm able to like synthesize it. And so I put boundaries around it. So I'm not doing it all the time, because that ends up being overwhelming and stressful. I see another question here. How do you separate work life when you're inside all day? And I would say that it's really important to get outside if you can, at least once a day, if not twice a day. Even if you just get outside for 5 minutes of a breath of fresh air, and be safe. If where I am, it's mandatory to put a mask on. My dog's been getting an awful lot of walks, and the sun and fresh air will do you a world of good. It will make you feel better. It will help lose that sense of cabin fever, and also, the sun can give us vitamin D, and I know that's important in being healthy. me see if there are some more questions coming in. I'm going to check if there's anything in the Q&A. Great. I have another question here. How to best set up boundaries with colleagues so they don't expect you to work all the time. Okay, so this is something that I have seen with a lot of nonprofits, that there are these expectations that since you don't have any place to go, that you should be working all the time. And I think we need to let those go. And I think it's really important to have a conversation with your team about like what are work hours and what are non-work hours. And this gets around, I don't know if you're using Slack or if the communication is happening on emails, but trying to really be conscious around sending after hours emails, maybe use one of the scheduling programs. And also if you're using Slack, try not to be posting at all hours, or, and really using, if you're using Slack and in other collaboration tools, use the status update in your profile to let people know what you're doing. Another thing that a couple of nonprofits are doing is to have regularly scheduled check-ins with staff and managers. And also, I just was working with the organization last week, and what they're doing is allowing Mental Health Friday. And for that, it's they've created no meetings, but it's a day. Half of the day is to catch up on work and to have quiet time, not to be online, not to answer questions, and also if they need to take a mental health day, to let everyone know that they're taking a mental health day. You know, if it's part of their sick time. I see some more questions coming in. Working for a board where each individual's focus is on their own work realm leaves me feeling extra stressed and responsible for all things. Even more now so working remotely and having only one part-time staff. Could use some thoughts on how to balance and readjust. I think, you know, I think this is kind of almost a natural response to the pandemic and the crisis. I know I went through it, at least in the beginning stages, where I felt like I had to take care of everybody. I had to take care of the whole nonprofit sector. And I crowdsourced a list of resources for COVID-19. And I was trying to get, you know, a lot of other people involved with it. And we were doing it on a Google Doc. And I found myself nonstop, like going through resources and putting them on the list. And I mean, and I had been pretty good before the crisis about work-life balance and kind of setting boundaries, but I felt like it all, in a way, collapsed. And I went, and it's like trying to run a marathon at your highest speed all the time. And if you do that, you're going to end up, I know it's a gross analogy, is throwing up on your sneakers by, you know, mile 10. So I came to the realization that this is not sustainable. And I shifted my mindset around it, that I need to take care of myself in order for me to help others. And how am I going to make that mental space, make that time for myself, and that I was going to get rid of any guilt around that. And so that's what I did for myself. I had a conversation with myself. Maybe if you have a colleague or a friend or a family member who you can talk to about this. But I would urge you to pace yourself and not to feel that you have to solve all of the problems. Take a step back. I'm going to also put in that list, Google list that I mentioned. I don't know if that answered your questions. Maybe do some journaling. Start with maybe spending some time in the morning for yourself, and go from there. So next, have you seen any interesting examples of things funders have done to support the well-being of their nonprofit partners? Actually, yes, I have seen from the Packard Foundation. They launched something called the Resilience Initiative. I've been a part of it with other consultants that have allowed, initially they were looking at organizational resilience and personal resilience, and resilience with a really broad kind of definition of both hard skills as well as sort of softer skills. And there's been a lot of pivot now to helping organizations develop well-being plans and how to develop robust virtual cultures, and how to facilitate online meetings that aren't as exhausting. Here's a great question. How do you balance staff's expectations of each other when family situations are different and it's easier to work from home for others and not for others? I think this gets back to leading with empathy. And I think that having group check-ins to let people, actually talk about what, how's it going? How is your work from home experiment going? What are you finding challenging? What are you finding easy? What are some tips that you've been able to do? And I really think that, I don't know if you're the leader, the manager, the person that's asking that question, but as the leader or the manager, we also have to practice a lot of forgiving and a lot of flexibility and a lot of creativity in the way that we're getting our work done, to account for the fact that, not everybody's situation is the same. And I really feel for you, because I know on one project that I'm working on with a team, I have 3 people who have, one of them has a 2 and 3-year-old, and another has a 4 and 5-year-old. And one of the things that we have done is, for that particular project, we now only schedule meetings at certain times or on certain days to accommodate their schedule, because they're also homeschooling, and we've also rethought about some projects and some deadlines and some different ways that we can support each other, so it's not putting the additional extra stress on people with families, young kids at home. I think is the hardest. Okay, so there's a wonderful question here about, do you have any interesting or fun ways to conduct a team meeting? For example, I've heard of organizations that encourage their staff to, yes, we've done the walking meetings. We've had virtual dog walks together. Zoom meetings, not Zoom webinar, has the ability to do things in breakout groups. So you can do small groups. I've had organizations doing a team meeting, but it was a lunch meeting together and everybody got the same pizza. There's also things that you can do, fun energizers that people can do, team building exercises. I just wrote actually a blog post about this, and I'm going to talk about and share a lot of that in the next webinar. Just looking down through the questions. Let's see. Here's another question about should we encourage employees to take some time off even if they have nowhere to go? And I think I said this already. I'm just going to say it again. Yes. And I'll talk about this more in the next session, but I really think it's important to focus on well-being, even if people just need a mental health day. I just, next week I had planned for next Friday, I decided for myself I needed a mental health day. I really need a vacation, but that's not going to be possible. And somebody just asked me to do something on that day. And I just came back and said, sorry, I'm taking a mental health day. I really need it. Encourage people, even if they're doing a staycation. So, we are facing a mental health crisis. So I really think that it's really important to encourage, if you're feeling people, if you're doing your check-ins as a manager, the most important questions you can ask is, how are you doing with this? How, are you finding any challenges to your productivity or your mood? And how can I support you? I'm going to close up in a moment. I have one more question I'll answer from the pre-questions. Why am I spending more time working from home than I did in the office, and how can I change that? That's because we don't have those buffer times, and about the time markers that I talked about. So what I would do for you is to, again, schedule regular work times and have a closing ritual. And then, look at this. This is a really great opportunity because there's a huge amount of free online courses being offered. I just noticed that Yale University has their well-being class that I've been dying to take. Coursera, a bunch of the online providers have gotten together, and there's this wonderful list. I'll include the resources. I personally like things like calligraphy and lettering. My husband and my daughter like to bake. That's kind of bad for the healthy food for me, but they're baking, doing crafts. Find some hobby that you've always been wanting to do and make time to do it. So in the last few minutes that we have, I want to encourage you to think about one thing that you can do that will help you build personal resilience and create work-life balance. You know, what is that one rainbow that you're going to either eat or start in your day, starting tomorrow or maybe next week, to continue to be optimistic, to continue your COVID healing, to build your personal resilience. So
Thanks.
Jeff.
Thanks so much, Beth. I just had one quick follow-up question. In the spirit of doing these webinars for May being Mental Health Month, you mentioned it's okay to take a mental health day. But I think a lot of people, there's still a stigma around saying, hey, I need a mental health day, and for some supervisors to say it's okay to take a mental health day. So can you leave us with some suggestions on how to have that conversation?
So it's more of this managing up when the managers aren't sort of being aware of what the impact is of the crisis on their employees, you know, well-being. So I would, you have to say, I really need to take a day off. Even though I'm at home, even though I can't go anywhere, I just need to focus on my kid or my family, and I need to just take a break from work and a break from the virus. I'm really feeling, you know, the stress from it, and I think this will help me improve my concentration when I come back, and I'll be able to focus more and get more done. And certainly it could be even a personal, people have personal days, or take a sick day as a personal day. Certainly that's the way I would approach it, to say that you need this, and that it will help me improve my productivity.
Great, thanks so much. Thanks everyone for joining us. As I mentioned earlier, this recording will be on the Scranton Area Foundation's YouTube channel by the end of the week as well. And join us again next Thursday at 2 p.m. for Beth's second part of her webinar around virtual teams and building a cohesive and positive workplace while we're all working virtually. So thank you so much, and thanks for coming, everyone.
Great, thank you so much, Jeff, and everybody. And I'm seeing folks here say things that they're going to do, and I think that's great. It's awesome. So start small and do it on the path to healing.
Awesome. Thanks so much.